Should Uber Eats and Uber Rides be separate apps, or should they be a combined, bundled app in some way? Hey everyone, so we're here again with a mock product management interview. I'm here with Matt. Matt, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself before we jump into the mock interview?
Sure thing. I'm a coach with Exponent, coaching on product management interviews. I started my career at Google in their APM program, and I was there for a couple years. Sat on the other side of the interviewing table for a while, interviewing candidates, and then left to do my own thing. Was down actually in LA working in film for a while, and just recently moved back up to San Francisco to run a startup. But throughout that whole time, I've been coaching with Exponent and helping people prepare for PM interviews.
Cool. Well, we're excited to have you, Matt. And today we're going to be doing a product management interview question. And so product strategy questions are more about how you think strategically about your product, maybe making tough decisions about how the product should be and how we should invest in the product and grow the product. Today, we're going to talk about Uber as a company example. And the question that I want to ask you is, should Uber Eats and Uber Rides, the Uber app where you book cars, should those two apps be separate apps, or should they be a combined, bundled app in some way? And so we're going to talk about that for the interview today.
Okay, great. Just to echo that back to you, the question is whether Uber Eats and Uber Rides should be separate apps or together.
That's correct.
One first clarifying question that comes to mind that I just want to clarify. Are we talking about this before they've launched, or is this, now? Because obviously, user confusion might be a consideration if we did it now.
Yeah. So we're going to assume that this is before launch. Like, this is a world where we sort of know the direction of those apps and we could make the decision before we actually launch them, because obviously there'd be a lot of confusion right now if that happened.
Yeah, sure. That totally makes sense. Mm-hmm. Great. Give me just a moment to put my thoughts together on how I want to approach this, and then I'll get started.
Cool. Sounds good.
I can get started now. Just to lay out how I want to approach this problem, first I want to just start out by talking a little bit about, the goals that Uber might have. Obviously Uber is the overarching company, and then it has Eats and Rides within that. So what are the goals that Uber might have with this process? Because that's, the decision that we make. Then based on that, I'm going to go through a couple of factors we'll want to consider. What important areas might we want to understand in order to make this decision. And then I'll actually go into a specific list of pros and cons based on that. And then from all of that, I'll come up with a decision.
Got it. Sounds good. Thanks for laying it out.
Okay, cool. So to start out, just talking about Uber, the company. So obviously, they already have Uber Rides here. Ride sharing, people get from point A to point B easily. And they're about to launch Uber Eats. So obviously Uber Eats is a different vertical, right? This is about delivering food to people's homes. I think from Uber's perspective, it's a move that makes sense for them because they already have drivers moving things around. And now what you're doing, you're swapping people out for food. But even with that same, so now with that same logistical infrastructure that you have, you can now access another vertical and another type of consumer, another use case. And so I would say the goal for them there is basically to drive additional business, right? In the same way that you might consider like Uber's goal for rides is the number of bookings that they get. What Uber is probably trying to do here is, drive how many food deliveries can they make, right? The goal is to drive some large number of deliveries.
No pun intended by drive additional business.
Sure.
But yeah, sorry to interrupt, but keep going.
Yeah. So that's why they're probably going to focus, because obviously Uber is already a large brand. And, they could be trying to acquire more users, but, Uber is already pretty huge. There may be new users that come along with this, but I see this mainly as a new avenue to engage the users that they already have using the brand, the user base that they've already built. So to me, that's the goal, is driving deliveries. Well, getting deliveries.
Got it.
uh, yeah. So, anyways, that's the goal that I'm considering. As we think about the factors to consider, there's a couple of clear ones that come to mind. First, is just from a product perspective, like, do these products make sense together? Product. And, are there synergies that come from them being together, or, problems that come from it? There's, I think, a marketing perspective. How do we talk about the product if they're together or if they're separate? Is it easier to do it in one way or another? Is what mental space does Uber take up, and is it confused with Uber Eats, or is it more clear? Related to that, there's the fact that these are apps, so there's going to be user acquisition questions, whether it makes more sense to have them together or separate.
What do you mean by the user acquisition questions?
Sure. This is something that I can go more specifically into in a bit, but
Sure.
if this is an app and Uber Rides already has a certain number of downloads, you can basically get an inbuilt base if you bundle them together. But, it might have, other issues that come with that, which as I said, I can dive into a little bit deeper in a second. There might be logistical questions. As I think about this from the driver's side, rather than, what the users, the consumers are doing, I know that Uber has a backend app for the drivers, and, that's kind of a separate concern from what these consumer-facing apps are. So I think for the most part, the logistical differences, we could have a single backend app if drivers are doing more or less the same thing. But there might be some logistical issues that come up with them being the same app or being separate. So I do just want to note it before I dive into these specifically. And then, there's the perspective of, from Uber's perspective, is there like more technical complexity in maintaining these as apps together? Is it harder to make changes to the app? Does it like affect their flexibility and their ability to build, their ability to launch on the App Store? Because now whenever, they make a change to one, it'll have to update the whole app. So yeah, these are sort of like the high level lines that are making sense to me, right? I just want to do one more quick pass through this before I get more specific on each of these, right? Product kind of tells us from the user's perspective. We've talked a little bit about the drivers / deliverers. There's Uber's perspective in this. I guess there's questions from a competitive perspective. How does this affect our ability to compete with players in both spaces? And then, other factors that might come up, like governmental. I don't really think that there will be any sort of like policy or regulatory issues here. Yeah, I think this more or less covers the angles that pop out to me as important to cover. So now, that I've kind of laid all of these out, the product side of it, the marketing side of it, user acquisition, any logistical issues, technical issues, or how it relates to competing in the market. There's kind of a long list, but I just want to go through these specifically, come up with whether they're a pro or a con, or what pros and cons they lead to, and then use that to make a decision.
Got it. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, it seems pretty comprehensive with the factors. And then yeah, let's dig into them and figure out what is relevant here.
Okay, sure. So let's talk about the product. So as I mentioned, there might be synergies, there might be places where they don't really align. I think if you look fundamentally at the two products, they are kind of doing different things, right? One is about a user going somewhere, right? And Uber does a lot of great things to help users do that very easily. But I am trying to go from my house to a concert or to a store or something like that, right? Whereas if you're thinking about Uber Eats, it's kind of the opposite, right? I'm trying to stay in my home, and I'm trying to have something delivered to me, right? It's still map based. It's still, you're still want to monitor a driver, and a lot of that technology can probably be leveraged. But I would say, if pro is putting the apps together, con is keeping them separate. I would say that this is a con of having them together. That the way that people want to use the apps, the reasons that they would be using it, are very different, right? And this consideration will also play into some of the other factors like marketing as I get into those. But I think just fundamentally, the core of the products are not aligned. So I'd call that a con.
Got it.
A pro that might come out of this is if there's ways to leverage synergy here in that, oh, we know that you're heading home right now, so why don't you consider, ordering food to get delivered when you get home as well? Certainly that's something you can do if they're separate apps, but it does reduce friction a little bit if they are within the same app. But overall, the app is less focused, and so I think this product consideration overall is leaning towards con. If we think from a marketing perspective, following up from what I was saying about product, we're talking about trying to market Uber rides as this way of transporting yourself, of getting around, and all of a sudden we're now going to have to figure out how do we market this app to also include food, right? You can certainly, if you're doing ad campaigns, you can focus on one use case or the other, but I think that there's potential for confusion between the two. It doesn't seem like there's a super clear story about why these two belong together. Sorry, why these two belong together from the user's perspective. I think from the Uber logistical perspective, it certainly does, but to somebody who doesn't really care about that side of it as much, as a user, that's not quite as meaningful. It could be useful if Uber had other plans for similar services and they wanted to put it all together. Maybe there's some kind of marketing around like Uber is the app that like is just like your logistical, place to go, right? Like whenever you need anything that is like not in your house or whatever, like Uber is the spot to go to. But that doesn't seem to be what they're going for here. And so I think, we don't really have a marketing story around that. Talking about the user acquisition side of things, obviously that ties into the marketing. We want to let people know that Uber Eats exists. And so if it's buried within the Uber Rides app, it becomes harder to let people know it exists. And it probably becomes harder to activate users on it. Because even though we can put, things within the app to try and drive users over to it, they're not qualified in the same way, right? Like if somebody downloads the app, they're probably a lot more interested in Uber Eats than somebody who just happens to have the Uber Rides app now that we've added this. The flip side of that, though, is that we do instantly have a huge user base. A pro for this is we can try to drive that whole mass over to Uber Eats if they're within the same app. We have like a large base to try and peel people off of and into this Uber Eats experience. Overall, since we're trying to drive deliveries, I would say that just having users who have access to Uber Eats is not necessarily the pure goal, right? It's having users who want to use Uber Eats and who are, people who are excited about the product going to use it a lot. And so for that reason, I would say that we probably are better off actually having a separate app from the user acquisition standpoint, just because we know that we're getting good users. And we can lower barriers to entry by, Uber already has logins from all their Uber rides. users. And so we can use that same login. We might be able to even auto log people in if they already have Uber rides on their phone, which can reduce some of the barriers. We don't need to get people's credit cards again, stuff like that. So that can lower that barrier as well. I had talked a little bit about apps in relation to this as well. And I think something interesting from this is that to talk about competition for a little bit, obviously both of these are competing in heavily competitive spaces. Uber with Lyft and all of its other ride-sharing competitors, Uber Eats with Postmates and DoorDash, and all this growing space. And I think when you think about that, an issue is how you fit into people's minds relative to those competitors, right? If you're Uber Rides, you want to be top of mind when somebody needs a ride. You want your app icon to be on their homepage so that they just press it when they need a ride. If you start to talk about the same thing for Uber Eats, there wouldn't be an Uber Eats app. It would just be an Uber app, which most people tend to associate with rides to start with. And so you might have a little bit of a disadvantage when it comes to like consideration of Uber as a player in that food delivery space, right? You probably want your Uber Eats app to be front and center and clear, and hey, this is the app that you're going to use here, versus DoorDash is clear, Postmates is clear, versus just Uber. From a logistical standpoint, I think that's not really going to matter. Like I said, I think the driver side of it, they can kind of be factored out of this since we have a separate app for them anyway. From a technical standpoint, I would say the main one is the fact that we are tying two different products together. There might be shared systems that we can use between them, like building out the map and ways that we can reuse code that would help. But on the whole, I think we end up tying two products that still want to do slightly different, that even with the map will want to do slightly different things together. And that will just add more complexity as we try to work through that. And then when it comes to app updates, like I mentioned, if we want to make some change to the Uber Eats UI, all of a sudden that means that we have to update the whole app. And even people who just want to use Uber Rides have to update their app for no reason, which kind of causes needless pain for those users and vice versa. And then I already talked about the competitive side of it. Anyway, so I've run through a long list of reasons here. And as I went through it, I think in general, I was tending towards a lot of cons for them being together. And then when we look back at that goal I mentioned about, trying to push as many deliveries as possible, it seems like a lot of those support, a lot of the reasons for them to be separate support that goal, right? We're going to get a clear set of users who want to use this app. It's going to be top of mind when they think about delivering food. It sets Uber up in a place where they can focus right on this delivery side of things without having to worry about muddling their ride story and vice versa. And so I think just to be a player in that space, to stave off competition, all of these reasons, they should probably be separate apps. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks for the answer, Matt. That was really great. I'm going to ask some follow-up questions, and then we'll do feedback in a little bit after that. So as a follow-up question, like let's just that was a really comprehensive, really excellent thing. Let's say I'm a PM on your team and I come to you and I'm like, Matt, I hear your reasoning, but like, this is the way we're going to get so many users. Like think about all the users in our Uber app. Like we're going to get so many people to use Uber Eats when we first launch it. And that's going to be instrumental to our growth. And we have all this marketplace stuff. We have all these vendors and things like that. Like, what would you say to me if I came to you and I was like, come on, just think about the users?
Yeah, I think that is a valid point, but it comes down to a matter of figuring out what's really important here. As I mentioned, I think the goal here is those deliveries, and it's not just about trying to snag users. Keeping users coming back and using the product is really going to be the lifeblood of this. If we get a user in and they use it once and then they leave, or they never come back to the Uber Eats section of it, it's not really that helpful, especially because I imagine as we launch this product, we'll probably give, we'll subsidize meals in some way. Hey, you get $20 free credit, or, free delivery on your first order or something like that. And so, the thing that's going to really drive the value of this product is users who come back. And certainly if you can bring a lot of users over, you would hope that some percentage of them are going to keep coming back. But because those users, like I mentioned, aren't highly qualified, you're kind of can spend all the money you want trying to pile users into this bucket, but if they keep leaking out, you're gonna, you're gonna spend a lot of money for little value. At the same time, Uber, the app does have a lot of users, and I would say that we can use that. We can still leverage that to try and get people over to Uber Eats. We can still do promos within the Uber app to convince them to download Uber Eats, to get them to go over to the app, to get them to open it. And I think the fact that they have done that work of downloading the app is more of a signal that this is somebody who is worth getting that promo, right? Rather than somebody who just happened to be very convenient versus, okay, we qualified them a little bit and clearly they are more interested in Uber Eats as a product and therefore more valuable to us as a customer.
Okay, fair. So I'm the PM again, and I'm like, all right, you have a good point. Like, I hear you. But then my next follow-up question, and this will be the last one before we do feedback, is like, well, why don't we split out more things? Like, why don't we take XLs out of the app, or why don't we take Uber Blacks out of the app? Like, those are really different use cases for people. Like, why shouldn't we have like a Uber Black app and an Uber XL app and a, I don't know what other maybe an Uber Pool app and things like that, so that we can really cover our bases, like you're saying.
Sure. I mean, you could probably turn that into a whole question of itself, similar to this one. No, I think overall, those use cases are more similar than they are between Uber Eats and Uber Rides. Certainly, people use them in slightly different ways, but you're still fundamentally solving that problem a user has of like, I'm at point A, I want to go to point B, and I want it to be easy. Different people have different preferences on how exactly they want that to happen, whether they're trying to spend less money on it and they can take a little bit longer and ride with strangers, or they want to ride in style and comfort because they're trying to impress a date or something, right? There's different reasons that you might ride these different ones, but the fundamental need is the same. And I think there's the fact that these things can be interchanged. If you're taking an Uber X or an Uber Pool, you can choose between them, and I think a lot of users probably do, right? I think a lot of people, when they open the app, probably look, oh, Uber X is going to be $15. What's the price of a pool? $12. All right, for that difference, I'll just take the X. Versus if the pool is $7, okay, for less than half the price, I'm willing to do that, right? And so these things are interchangeable. As you get out to things like Uber Black, it's probably less interchangeable with Uber X, but at the same time, you're still occupying that mind space of like, Uber is where I go for a ride. And a user who constantly uses Black probably doesn't need a separate app. And there's probably not, those are smaller markets anyway. And so it's probably not worth building those separate apps because we're not trying to get a giant mass of users using that, right? We're not trying to build a real business there in the same way we are with Uber Eats. We're just using them as an ancillary to our Uber X specific line, so that we can capture more of these people who need rides.
Got it. Cool. Okay, so I'll pause there. Let's do a little bit of, you can start off with feedback or how you think that went, and then I'll do feedback and we can wrap.
Sure. So overall, I was pretty happy with how that went. I think I tried to underline the different factors I was considering, but I'm worried that it still felt a little bit like a mess of different concepts and maybe a little slow to get through. I think, not to put another layer of structure in between this, since I tried to be very structured with this one, but maybe like, okay, first we're going to talk from the things that affect the user, and that's the product and the marketing and all of this. Then we're going to talk about the things that affect the drivers. Then we're going to talk about the things that affect Uber, just so that I could have like a little bit of a clear path of why I was talking about these topics. Because I don't know if I made it clear like why these were the specific lenses I chose to focus on versus just, oh, is this just what he happened to think of if he was scrambling for it. I think I could have been a little clearer with saying this is a con, this is a pro. I think it was fairly obvious from the nose in terms of making, to have that, here's the whole set of cons, and it's adding up to it. There's also the fact that I might have decided a little too early on that it was definitely going to be a no. As I went through it, even after the product and the marketing, it was becoming pretty clear that putting them together was going to be a hard sell, that it doesn't make a ton of sense. And I think that biased me to focus mainly on the no's. But to do this in a more balanced way and to really make a great decision, I probably should have found more pros for this, even if they weren't going to be as important to the final decision.
Totally. Yeah, those are great thoughts. Specifically, I mean, I loved, there was a point for the structure piece where you started going through from the product perspective, from the marketing perspective, and I really started to like click in my head. So yeah, I thought that was effective later on. Overall, like super great answer. I thought you had a lot of really awesome, solid points. I thought that one piece of feedback I had is that if we were doing a whiteboard session, we would be able to write up some of those things, and it would have been
Yeah.
cool to say like
I would
pro,
love
con. And I know, at the timing of this video, there's a lot of coronavirus stuff going on, and a lot of people's interviews are being switched to a video format. And so it can be challenging to convey some of that information in a video format. Sometimes I just recommend like writing out on a piece of paper, like, here's like the points, and then showing it to the interviewer if you have to. So that could have been an effective method if needed to kind of walk through some of those pieces more clearly with me. I also think that, you did what things that I really liked about your answer is that you went through a lot of factors, you covered a lot of ground, a lot of interesting points and insights. You had a clear answer at the end. It was super hard for me to argue against you. Like, it was like, well, yeah, I mean, it really doesn't feel like, it felt so clear at the end. I thought you did a great job of tying the product vision in the beginning into the end of the answer. So, here's the product vision, here's our goal, here's all the factors, and then let's look back at the goal. Did we accomplish the goal? Are we aligning ourselves to that goal? And those are the most effective product management interview answers, is when interviewees can do that effectively. I did think you had really good structure. It was kind of clear when you walked through those points. And then, yeah, I think a little bit around like visual aids would have helped me as a listener kind of like walk through those answers with you. And then, you could talk about a little bit of, I did feel like you covered almost all the different perspectives, like product, government, even you touched on marketing, like all that kind of stuff. There might be some, if the interviewer wants to, you might want to talk more technically about what the sign-ins look like, or like that kind of stuff. So just being ready to talk about that would be helpful. I didn't ask any follow-ups there. Yeah, but overall, super great answer. Did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
Not in terms of feedback for me. I think that was really helpful. And, definitely as I was going through it, I wish that I had something like tangible to put up so I could just put it in front of you. So thinking about ways to do that in this, sort of video on-site environment would definitely be helpful for clients. One thing that I notice in these kinds of questions, right, something like this, and something that I was touching on a little bit before, is sometimes it seems like people will come to an answer before they do any reasoning. And somebody will hear this question and be like, they should be separate apps, and here's why, right? And, you might get a little bit of insight out of that, but I think that when you do that, you lose the ability to show the interviewer how you reason about these kinds of questions. And that's really what this is about, right? Is what things do you need to understand in order to make a decision? How do you go through that decision-making process? And then how do you turn that into a clear decision at the end? And so if you just start out saying no, because these products just clearly don't work together, you haven't shown that you can actually make a decision. You've just shown that you made one.
Totally. Yeah, totally. And thinking out loud with the interviewer is part of the point of the interview.
Yes.
And so, yeah, definitely not going in with like, this is the way it should be, and I'm going to justify that, but having an open mind. I think it was a good point that you made in your self-feedback too. Yeah.
Similar to in a product question, how you don't want to just immediately jump to a solution. Instead, you want to talk through, why you got to that solution. And then not only will the interviewer understand it, you'll probably also come to a better, more nuanced answer anyway.
Totally. Okay, well, is there anything else you wanted to add? Otherwise, that was super great.
Uh,
Cool.
yeah, I'm good.
Well, thanks everyone for watching. If you have other thoughts on other factors that might be relevant in deciding between bundling or unbundling the Uber Eats and the Uber Rides app, we would love to hear it in the comments below. And we hope that this was helpful for you. You can always check out more of our great content at tryexponent.com. Thanks, Matt, for joining the show.
Thank you, Stephen.